Ladies and gentlemen, in 2016, the Russians and the Putins infiltrated the DNC to inform us that they weren't being exactly fair to Bernie Sanders. They railroaded him. It's within their own emails. This is any true Bernie Sanders supporter from back in the day who could be a Trump supporter like myself, or who could just, be a Democrat, or whatever. It doesn't matter. Any true Bernie Sanders supporter knows that they railroaded Bernie Sanders. Unfortunately, he said absolutely nothing about it. He allowed the racket and the scheme to take place. In many ways, he took part in it. And he raised, according to Open Secrets, let's just see here, in 2016, in a fair and neutral primary, because people were promised it was a fair and neutral primary from Debbie Wasserman Schultz, wonderful individual. Total raised $228,164,501. Now, Bernie Sanders gets donations from hundreds of thousands of people. It was something around well over around 1.5 million to 2 million people. I think even more than that. And these are hardworking people. These are not very wealthy generally in 2016 and 2020. How much money did Bernie Sanders give back to those individuals who were duped and deceived and taken for a ride by the Democratic Party? I mean, they get caught with their pants down. Oh my goodness, I really did. They really do. I really did get caught with my pants down. They get caught with their pants down. They get caught in the act with their hand in the cookie jar, and $228 million plus $228,164,501 was raised. Okay, total $229 million, $229,099,494 was raised in 2016 by the wonderful Democratic Socialist Bernie Sanders. Okay, I used to be the biggest Bernie Sanders booster on the internet, according to the Huffington Post. I was the unofficial scribe of Sanders' most hardcore voters, according to the Washington Post. My only sin, according to Democrats, was actually writing about Bernie Sanders in the same way they wrote about Hillary Clinton. And my articles went viral in The Hill, the Huffington Post, Salon. You can go to hagoodman.com. You could read my writing there. And also you could read my writing in The Federalist and The Daily Caller. Ladies and gentlemen, you can read my writing opposing counterinsurgency conflicts. We should have learned from the lessons of Vietnam. Instead, George W., and Cheney and Rumsfeld and President Obama and our beloved President Biden are continuing to disregard the lessons we learned. For the past 20 years, he'll keep us there indefinitely. The reason people say, how do you go from Bernie Sanders to Trump? Well, because you lack the knowledge of how somebody goes from Bernie to Trump doesn't mean that there isn't a very logical and rational vantage point from going from Bernie to justify going from Bernie to Trump. President Trump, unlike Bernie Sanders, gives his voters a whole lot to be happy about. On May 1st, 2021, President Trump negotiated a deal to remove Americans from a counterinsurgency conflict and from a quagmire that we've been in for 20 years. Biden will keep us there indefinitely. That's one of the many reasons, but the primary reason I voted for President Trump. And I would vote for President Trump again 4 years from now because I want Americans home. That is it's a far greater national security risk than anything Democrats obsess over. Because there's something called mission creep. God forbid there could be a tragedy. Well, I mean, Biden in the first month of his presidency sent a message to the same country he's now negotiating with pertaining to a deal that President Obama, a really flawed and absurd policy. We don't get into it. Anyway, hit subscribe to this channel right now. The new story, hit subscribe, tell your friends about this channel. The new story now is, oh my goodness, Trump campaign issued $122 million in refunds to donors. Yeah, that's good. Where's the refund from Bernie Sanders? He should have given all $200 million back to hardworking people. He's always talking about wealth inequality. Well, how much wealth did he take from people who he essentially lied to? If he knew that there was a racket going on, and he must have known at a certain point, because he's never brought it up. He's never admitted that they cheated him. He's never admitted that they took him for a ride. They railroaded him and his voters. Trump fights. He might be boorish and mean, but that's not like a totalitarian and despot and authoritarian doesn't sign prison reform legislation and doesn't limit military interventions. It certainly, like, you look at the regime changes with Democrats and the Bush administration. President Trump is against those things. So you're not an authoritarian if you oppose never-ending conflict and sign prison reform legislation. You have to know nothing about history to think that Trump is an authoritarian. Like, you have to know, like, either very little or practically nothing about history to pretend that Trump is an authoritarian or despot. But that's the only thing they have is hyperbole. They can't just say, I don't like his personality, so therefore I don't like him. They can never acknowledge that he's done good things. But here, former President Donald Trump's 2020 re-election campaign reportedly issued a total of roughly $222 million in refunds to supporters in 2020. The refunds were given in part because of a fine print disclaimer in communications that officials used to continue charging one-time donors or doubling their contribution amount. So that's not good. Or double, I don't think that was standard. But here, a New York Times investigation. Of course, the New York Times never investigated the DNC or the DNC fraud lawsuit or any of the shenanigans that took place in 2016. The antithesis of democracy and fair play and fair and neutral elections. But here, a New York Times investigation published Saturday found that starting in September, with only 2 months to go before the 2020 presidential election, the Trump campaign allegedly set up weekly recurring donations as the default for online donors. Well, okay, that is bad, and that shouldn't have happened, but like, if you're not paying attention, you should always pay attention, because a lot of sites do that. That's different from the Democratic Party completely and utterly undermining Bernie Sanders and taking the majority or a great percentage of the $220+ million that he raised and funneling it back into the Democratic Party so they could eventually purchase a Steele dossier after they lost miserably to Trump, which I predicted. You know, there are people who say, oh, you haven't been right about... It's like, I was right about the biggest thing in the past 5, 6, 7, 10 years. I was telling people Clinton was going to lose. People forget the euphoria that Democrats had, the absolute certainty. I was the only person on the left. Literally, I was on the left my whole life. And I'm still liberal on, like, immigration, like, issues. There are things that I want dreamers to become citizens, but I want Americans home, which is a Trump policy, to bring Americans home. Then the rebuttal is, well, they get it. So, yeah, the Democrats, even Bernie Sanders was against it. He's like, oh, it has to be an orderly withdrawal. Why don't you withdraw yesterday, tomorrow? Why keep Americans there? Haven't we learned the lessons that the French learned, that the Soviets learned, that we learned? God bless the American men and women who implement the foreign policy of people like Biden and President Obama and George W. Bush and Cheney and Rumsfeld. We owe these men and women better. We owe them. The children of veterans are now fighting the same quagmires. We should bring them home. We should bring them home. But here, that's why I voted for. That's one of the main reasons I voted for President Trump. But here, Trump campaign issued $122 million in refunds to donors. Okay, but at least he offered the refunds. All you get now is, oh my God, he deceived people. You ran a primary that was completely and utterly skewed, and you lied to millions upon millions of primary voters. Democrats interfered in their own primary, and then they complained and blamed Trump for Russia interfering in the election. And then they cried foul in the outrage when Trump made similar allegations. He didn't have direct evidence, but he didn't have the luxury of investigating. You better believe Democrats had the luxury of investigating. They even have Major League Baseball going to bat for them. Literally. They even have Major League Baseball. Oh, yeah, well, we think that the voting reform laws are unfair. And, it's like, well, you don't even look at the exit polls. President Trump did better among black citizens in Georgia. He did better than in 2016. In 2020, he did better. Look at the exit polls and minority voters in Georgia and throughout the country. He got the greatest percentage of non-white voters, according to Newsweek, than any Republican since Nixon. And if there's one rebuttal that says, George W. Bush did better. Like, okay. Then aside from George W. Bush, still, with the media calling him, a monster and a menace, he still did better. Okay? If you don't have everybody from every single entity from Major League Baseball to Hollywood to the intelligence community, corrupt intelligence operatives who claim with high to moderate confidence, nothing with certainty, that Trump might have worked with Russia. If you don't have every single possible advantage, what happens to the Democratic Party? And Trump campaign issued 100, and they have the slimmest of majorities in the Congress. Could you imagine if media didn't take a side? If Major League Baseball and other corporations, Delta, Coke, I mean, this is absurd. What are they haven't even waited for a court of law to say, oh yeah, these reforms are unconstitutional. Read the actual reforms. They're addressing pandemic-related protocol that was just implemented quickly because science. Republicans can take advantage of the loopholes within these protocols as well. So, anyway, and they did, like Slate, the New York Times, Palm Beach Post, had a whole bunch of articles talking about how Republicans were taking advantage of certain, certain bizarre protocol related to a whole bunch of things that the Georgia law addresses. ID, everyone has ID. Everyone has ID. They're still early voting. So what's the problem? Even Biden got 4 Pinocchios the other day. Nobody cares. Notice how there's no running tally of all the lies that the Biden administration told, which should be at least in the hundreds now, especially pertaining to what's taking place in the southern geographic region of our country. And then Keith Olbermann's hilarious. He has this thing. He's like, "What do you want? What do you want us to do? How about address the horrendous humanitarian crisis that you're presiding over, Mr. Olbermann? My God, how blind do you have to be? Look at what's taking place. You have facilities that are overcrowded to the point where there are like locations that should only hold maybe 40 or 50 people that hold hundreds now. Do you think maybe you shouldn't be blaming Trump? Maybe you should take ownership of the catastrophe and the unmitigated disaster that's taking place while Democrats, are running the show? My God, he's like, what do you want us to do? He did this whole reaction. He's like, it's not even a crisis. What do you want us to do? It's like, we want you to take care of... We want you to do what you stated Trump should have done. Take care of the crisis immediately and address the humanitarian concerns, which are far greater, by the way, going on now because there's more people overrunning those facilities. Notice how Yad Vashem had to refute AOC's revisionist and denial claims. The Yad Vashem in Jerusalem, I wrote an article, op-ed about this in the Jerusalem Post, where she equated a time period that she should never again talk about to what's taking place. Guess what? They're using the same facilities. Where's AOC? Oh, okay, everything's fine now. Or she'll say a couple things here. This is really bad, it shouldn't happen. But no grandstanding, no moral outrage, no condemnation. Oh my God. You're talking about the biggest hypocrites on the planet. At least Trump issued refunds. Where's the refunds? Where's the Bernie Sanders refund to 2016 voters and to even 2020 voters? You think Iowa... This is why the left will always get stomped on by the Democratic Party, because they're so utterly weak. They never stand up to the Democratic Party. Anybody who does is disparaged. Look what they did to Jimmy Dore simply for asking for a Medicare for All vote. My God. You remember Iowa? Remember they didn't find out who won Iowa until like 3 days later? And then it was Mayor Pete? And then the leftists were so like, they thought they were so awesome and wonderful by putting like these horrible emojis next to his name. Like, what? No, I don't want to get into it. I'm not in that world anymore. Thank God. Give me your thoughts below. Hit subscribe right now. Where's the Bernie Sanders? Did Bernie Sanders refund even $1 of the 220 plus million that he raised? So at least Trump is doing something good, or did something good. Give me your thought. I mean, yeah, it was bad, but at least he addressed the issue. Bernie Sanders hasn't even acknowledged that he was railroaded by the Democratic Party. Give me your thoughts.